I want to make sure that when you're looking at the mentor text, you see all the awesome things that the student writer did. A mentor text is an example of a response that another person wrote that you can use to model your own responses after. It's just an example of a good answer, right? So let's take a look at this one. This one we started to annotate while we were in class together, and you needed to finish it as homework, so let's do it together. First, in 2014, we know that that is part of the context, time and place. That is a concrete part of the context. Brian Stevenson, a lawyer and social justice advocate, published his memoir, Just Mercy, A Story of Justice and Redemption. That's telling us about the speaker, the concrete details of who he is and what he has done in his career. You might also say that that does tell us some abstract things about Stevenson, because if he's a social justice advocate, then obviously he believes in social justice. And if he published a memoir called Just Mercy, A Story of Justice and Redemption, he's concerned with mercy. So you could actually label that both. The memoir chronicles Stevenson's work as the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, a nonprofit legal practice. This just tells us more about Stevenson, so concrete speaker. And then we come down to Stevenson wrote at a time when debates over mass incarceration, the death penalty, and sentencing reform were highly contentious. You can see here that yes, this is about Stevenson, but it's not about him as a speaker. It's about the context of his rhetorical situation. He's writing at a time when the public is debating these reform issues. And so we start to get some abstract information about the context, in that this was a time of social change and social movement where America was looking at how it treats criminals and how the sentencing is either too extreme and should be changed or not. Now, we also learn some abstract information about the audience from this, because it says that debates were highly contentious. Now, contentious means that not only do people not agree, but they have very strong feelings, and they are willing to share those feelings, and people get offended, people get their feelings hurt, people are very passionate about their beliefs and values around this topic. So this kind of gives us some abstract information about the context, that emotions are running high and people feel very strongly around their position. Let's take a look at the next paragraph. The next paragraph is going to start talking about Stevenson attempts to inform his audience about the necessity of compassion and mercy towards others, even if they do not deserve it, while providing them with historical and legal background necessary to understand what race influences our justice system. Now, this is the information that Stevenson wants the readers of his book to know, and since he's informing us about this information, this is his message. Notice that the message statement is the information he wants us to know. In the next paragraph, he talks about what he wants us to do once we know that information. The student writer says, his memoir aims to prompt his audience to confront their feelings and beliefs about vengeance and race in the criminal justice system, enabling them to see the incarcerated as human beings and ultimately motivating them to vote for or advocate for prison reform. This is what he wants us to do with his information. We can see that there's a lot of verbs in the message statement. Prompt his audience, confront their feelings, enabling them to see, and ultimately moving them to vote or advocate, right? So that purpose statement, there needs to be some action words, some verbs, saying what the speaker wants the audience to do with the information they're providing them. The next paragraph is the challenge statement. Now, the way that this person wrote this part of the paragraph is they said that the challenge was based on the audience. Most of the challenge statements should point out parts of the audience that are going to provide a challenge for the speaker. The challenge is not about the speaker's personal things they need to overcome. So the challenge here isn't that Stephen thinks the laws are unfair. That's not the challenge. That's about Stephen. His challenge is presented to him by his audience. The difficulty in getting the audience to consider prison reform lies in their limited experience with individuals in the justice system, which gives them a narrow perspective. So the challenge he's facing is he has to get people to have a different perspective because their perspective is so limited. That's a challenge that the audience presents to him, right? That's a quality of the audience that is going to be challenging for him to overcome. Stevenson must first establish trust and present himself as a credible, reliable, and professional source. If he has to develop trust, right, the audience may not trust him. So we're finding out more about the audience at the same time. Only then will the audience be able to listen when he challenges their ways of thinking. That's another thing that's going to prove difficult. Getting people to challenge their own ways of thinking, to look at what they're thinking and say, that might not be right. That's really hard to do. After that, he must work to shift their perspective so that they understand not all criminals are the same and do not simply deserve harsh punishment. If a lot of the people in his audience think that criminals just deserve the harsh punishment, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, he is going to have to overcome that somehow to get them to agree to prison reform. So that is a challenge he has to overcome. Finally, Stevenson must address the public's belief that victims are always best served by long, harsh sentences without dismissing victims' needs or appearing to blame them. Could you imagine if Stevenson came out with this really hard line of victims aren't important, we have to focus on the rights of the people who are incarcerated? That would immediately turn a lot of people off because it would appear like he doesn't have empathy or compassion for victims. So it's going to be very challenging for someone to refocus society on the rights of those in jail and the rights of those who have been convicted, not to have cruel and unusual punishments, if at the same time we're making it seem like we're not compassionate to victims. If we do that, we know Stevenson's not going to get his point across. So that may be the biggest challenge that he faces. And finally, the two rhetorical choices are at the end. To achieve this, Stevenson employs anecdotes that are interwoven with data and historical information. So again, I hope that makes it clearer what will get you a 10 or full credit for the challenge statement. If you have any questions, let me know, and make sure that you have annotated this sample completely so that I can give you full credit.